Hello, friends. What a time we live in, isn't it? If it isn't one thing, it's another. First of all, 2 years of the pandemic, and various restrictions, and all the limitations, the difficulties in just simply getting on with life and getting on with each other. And yet, that's lessening. The restrictions are falling like leaves in the fall, so to speak. And then the situation in the Ukraine, and Putin bringing all of this violence upon that land and its people. And we see the images of suffering, of death, of fear, of chaos. And then we also think, well, that's also true still in many other parts of the world. Violence, war, the degradation of human life. And so with that, well, let's just admit it, it stresses us out. It stresses us out individually, but very much as a collectivity. And then here in Manitoba, we've had 2 months of really cold weather with lots of snow. That's the least of our worries in a way. But still, stress. We'd like to be free of all of this. And you know, that word free, freedom, it's a word we've heard often during the time of the pandemic. Now, you know, the freedom of Ukraine, the freedom to live their life in a normal way, in a peaceful way, the freedom to know God's goodness among all peoples. And it's true, the temptation, and it is a temptation, so we need to take a choice before it. There is a temptation to sort of go into a bunker of fear, of darkness, little hope, or to rise up and cry words of violence or words of division, condemnation of others. Times of stress can bring us to that. I was actually talking to someone who studying in psychology, and they were saying that psychologists have discovered that collectively there's been more evidence of inflammation of the brain, physically our brain, through stress. And that inflammation of the brain brings us to be more irritable, to be sharper, there's where we are. And to be free of all of that. But then, and here continuing in what I spoke last time, about what have we learned, what are we learning from this moment, from the pandemic, now from the situation of Ukraine. What have we learned? And a reflection upon that sense of being free. And there can be two ways of looking at it. I mean, it's always enmeshed, but two ways. One way can be, I want to be free and I have my rights. The other way can be, what would bring a greater freedom for all of us? Freedom to, in fact, know peace amongst us. Simple harmony in our families, in our friendships, in our relationships. Freedom to know the goodness of sharing life, struggles, difficulties, but of sharing life together out of love. where in the end the question becomes, how do I grow freer inside, in my heart, at the core of who I am as a person? How do I grow freer such that then what really fills my mind, my efforts, my decisions, my life, is the freedom of the other person to know God's love, the freedom of all of society to resemble more and more the reign of God, where the cry for freedom becomes, Lord, make me free enough. Help me to be more free so as to love. And then think about this, because I said I would make my reflections not from a political or scientific or psychological or sociological focus, but first of all from the focus of our faith. And to think about this, that the human being who was the freest was Christ on the cross. Now again, that seems to make no sense. And it makes no sense if we think that Christ was a victim. He wasn't. He wasn't at all. That he, on the cross, in the love of the Father, freely gave absolutely everything to show us the way of love, to show us the power of love, even when it seems to be most crushed, to show us the way of love that frees us from our sins, the harshness, the dark wolf inside of us, and free to love. And so we're entering into the season of Lent, and it's good to think and to live that out, to think, okay, this Lent, what will I do to bring myself, what will I ask of the Lord to work in me such that I do indeed find myself, choose to be free to spend time praying for peace in Ukraine and peace in the world. That I'll find myself wanting to reach out. And we have so many people of Ukrainian descent here in Manitoba. It's a huge richness, cultural richness. And I'm not only talking about pierogies and olapshi, okay? But but to reach out and words of encouragement, words of affirmation, especially if you know people who've arrived from the Ukraine in the last 10, 20 years, who's 30 years, and who still have family there, and they're so taken up with fear for their family back in Ukraine, that we go without spending money for this or for that, that might, please us or compensate our stress, falsely. But that we fast, we sacrifice, we go without to be able to give to those organizations like the Catholic Near East Welfare Association or Development and Peace, that are going to indeed bring help to those people who are suffering. And just to think about it, as Canadians, are we going to be free to welcome the refugees? And not just to say, yeah, come on in, but really support them. So that whole sense of the freedom that really matters is the freedom of all of us to know God's love, a freedom built by all of us, and where the primary focus for a Christian, a follower of Jesus, is to look at the cross and say, Lord, help me to be free like you're free on the cross. Help me to love, to know God's love, and to choose to share that love in any way that I can for the freedom of the other, for the freedom of the other to know your goodness for all. Anyway, some thoughts as we begin this Lent. Have a good Lent, and may God bless you, bless us all with freedom.